Today is September the 8th, 2021. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program here at Oklahoma State University. This interview is being recorded in the OSU Library on campus here in Stillwater and will be part of the project called We Will Remember Promise Oral History Collection. And with me is Dr. Suzanne Burks, Director Emeritus of the University Counseling Services here at OSU. She retired in 2016 after a 30-year career, and the last 20 of those years was serving as Director of the University Counseling Services. So thank you for being here today. For today's interview, we will be talking about 3 historic events impacting OSU and the Cowboy family during Dr. Burks' tenure: the 2001 and 2011 plane crashes, and then the 2015 homecoming parade accident. By way of context, January 27, 2001, a plane crashed carrying 10 men associated with the men's basketball program at OSU, and the university and community made a promise to the families that those lost would never be forgotten. And then 10 years later, November the 17th, 2011, a plane crash carrying 4 people associated with the women's basketball program at OSU. And then October the 24th, 2015, a person drove into a crowd watching the OSU homecoming parade, killing 4 people and injuring around 50 more. So that's 3 major tragic events here at OSU during your time. So we'll get into those in just a minute. But before we get there, let's learn a little bit about you.
Well, I am originally from Oklahoma City, a proud graduate of Putnam City Original. In 1968, there were 957 people in my graduating class, and we were the reason that Putnam North started. Came up here in the fall of 68 as a freshman, with all the excitement and wonder in the whole world. I lived in the dorms.
Which one?
Wilhelm. Originally, Wilhelm South was the women's dorm. And they weren't both Wilhelm then. Wilhelm South was the women's, and 12th Story was the name of what's now Wilhelm North. But it was great. It was brand new. Loved it. Met lifelong friends, of course, there. And I was a marginal student, probably. I had a little bit too much fun and freedom, but I managed to graduate in 1972 with a degree in elementary education. I got a job teaching in Guthrie, taught 6th grade in Guthrie, and adored the kids, absolutely loved the kids, and absolutely, I'm not a teacher. I found out I am not a teacher. So I only taught for 1 year, and then I came back here and I started working at the Student Health Center on campus in the business office. Yeah. Well, I wanted as far away from teaching as I could possibly get. There are some gifted people that need to be in that field, but I'm not one of them. But I worked there for almost 8 years. And during my time there, in the basement of that building was a student mental health clinic. And that was also where the break room was down in the basement. And I got to know the director of that student mental health clinic just in the break room, just visiting over coffee. And one day she said to me, "When are you going to go back to school so you can get paid for what you're doing already?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "You're everybody's counselor. They all come in here and they sit down and they pour their hearts out to you. You know, why don't you go back to school?" It never crossed my mind. And I told her, I said, "I don't think that I'm smart enough to go to graduate school." And she said, "Yes, you are. You go take 1 class this summer." It was right at the end of the spring semester. "And if you don't make an A, I'll never say another word to you." And I did, and I fell in love. Just fell in love. I had a wonderful, wonderful professor for that 1 class. And that's where it all started. 6 years later, I came out with my doctorate. I had done all my practicums and internships downstairs in student mental health. And somewhere during my graduate travels, they started paying me. And I was like, whoa, this is so much fun, and they're paying me. But then they hired me full time after I graduated. And I don't know how many years passed, but Dr. Ron Beer, who was the Vice President for Student Affairs at the time, and Dr. Patrick Murphy, who was the Director of University Counseling Services, and ultimately ended up being my boss, they took a look at student mental health, and it was decided that they were going to combine student mental health with University Counseling Services. So we were all moved over to the union. And that's how I ended up at University Counseling Services. Dr. Murphy was the director for several years after that. I ended up being coordinator of university counseling because there are several departments under that director role, like student disability services and different ones. And so I was one of his coordinators, and he probably more than anybody else in my life was my mentor. And even in retirement, sometimes I still think, how would Pat respond to this? Because he was a brilliant man, and he was one of the most kind people I've ever known in my whole life. So anyway, I had the privilege of working under him for several years, and then he retired. And I didn't know if I was going to make it or not. But when he retired, he encouraged me to apply for the director's position, which I did. And I think we had 2 other internal candidates, not counseling center, but OSU, and 1 or 2 from outside. And it was a pretty grueling process, but I got the job. And that's how it all started for me as director of the counseling center.
And that would have been 1997. Does that
Yeah.
sound about right?
Yes, about 1997, 98, somewhere around in there.
So do you want to name the woman that suggested you go to grad school? Do you want to say her name?
Her name was Dr. Sherry Maxwell. And her husband also worked at Student Mental Health. He was a psychiatrist here in town, Dale Maxwell. And Sherry was very good to me, very good to me. She was good for me. She was an encourager. She was the person that kept pushing me and pushing me and pushing me. And she lives in Tulsa now, and I haven't seen her in several years. But yeah, she was a big part of me getting into this business.
And what was the class that you took? Do you remember?
I don't remember the name of it, but it was kind of a general
Psychology.
Yeah, psychology class. And Dr. Joe Pearl was the instructor, the professor. And he kind of had a reputation for being pretty serious. And, so I was really scared going into that class. But he ended up just being wonderful and very, very good teacher.
So, you found your niche.
I did. And I didn't even know I wanted it.
Well, let's back up then. How did you decide to come to OSU to begin with back in 68?
That's a good question. It was by default, actually. I was raised by a single dad. My mom died when I was young. And he was a wonderful, wonderful man. But his idea of parenting was to take the reins and just pull them as tight as he could. And so I knew I wanted away from home. And I majored in journalism in high school and was editor of the All School magazine and a couple of other things. But we had gone down to OU for a journalism conference for high school kids and spent a week down there. And when I came home, I knew I didn't want to go to school there. And that's how I picked OSU, because I didn't like it there. for many reasons, and OU's a fine school, and I had very close colleagues and friends down there, but I didn't like it then. And so I told my dad, I want to go to OSU. And he said, well, how do you know? You've never been there. I said, well, it's got to be better than OU. And I didn't show up until the first day you could move in.
Okay, you didn't visit before?
No, ma'am. I didn't even know where Stillwater was. And he let me drive up here by myself, and then he followed me with a bunch of stuff, but he wasn't right behind me. So I'd made a long distance trip before, but I had no idea where I was going. And I just pulled right up to Wilhelm and marched right in and signed myself in and got my little room key. I was just happy as a clam, not afraid of anything, didn't seem, looking back on it.
And your first roommate?
My first roommate, well...
You don't have to name names, but how did it work? Didn't work out?
The first one did not. And I kind of had it thrust on me. It was somebody from home, my church, that I knew, but we were nothing alike and we didn't get along. And she needed a roommate, so I ended up being it. Well, clear down at the other end of the hall on the third floor of Wilhelm, 328 to be specific, I met the girls down there from Paul's Valley and just fit in with them. And the one I really got close to, Cheryl. Cheryl stayed. Her roommate left after one semester. So I just, like a bunny rabbit, moved down there. And we lived together for the next 4 years. Yeah. We didn't live until our graduation. We didn't live together in the spring of 72 because she got married. No, I just lived in that same room. So I loved living in they don't call them dorms anymore, but that wasn't a bad word when I was in school.
The communal bathroom down the hall?
Oh, I didn't mind that. I didn't mind any of it. I loved it all. And
was it air conditioned?
Uh-huh. Yeah, oh gosh, yeah.
Okay.
You couldn't even open the windows. You had to break a seal to open the windows. And if you did, you got charged a lot of money. Well, it doesn't matter. But there was a communal dining and eating area and socializing area both upstairs and downstairs on the first floor. Excuse me. And I just thought that was wonderful. Everybody knew everybody, and I got to be around a lot of people that I never had been around before. The only person that wasn't from the United States that I ever knew was our exchange students in high school, which was 2 people. It was a pretty generic white middle class upbringing. And all of a sudden I started meeting all these people from different places in the world. And I had one girlfriend in the dorm who was a year older than I. We'd gone to high school together, and she was dating a man from India. And he lived in an apartment. He was a graduate student. She was going over there for dinner one night and invited me to come. And I never had any kind of Indian food or anything. Oh, we begged him. Everybody on our floor begged him to cook for us all the time. And it was a really, really good experience for me. I wasn't a very serious student. But I did learn a lot, a whole lot. My pastor from my upbringing told me the Sunday I was moving up here, and he said, now, Susie, put his arm around me. He said, now, Susie, I just have one piece of advice for you. I don't want you to let your studies interfere with your education. And boy, did I take it to heart. But my undergraduate stuff was really, I loved it. I loved it.
Spend much time in the library that time around?
Well, yeah. When Wilhelm's way out there. And when it was really, really cold and we had to walk on the campus, we walked through the library to warm up. but no, I didn't spend much time in the library. I was not I did okay, but I was a pretty average student.
Well, what was the environment like at that time in the
Oh, wow.
late 60s?
Well, we were right in the middle of Vietnam, and that was everybody that was here in my class, or there were freshmen in 68, we all knew people that were in Vietnam. We all lost people. The draft was going on. People were getting drafted, and so it was and there were people on campus, as I think you find in any environment, but especially on university campuses. Some of them were pro, we need to be over there and be fighting, and others were very anti. So I saw my first protests. I saw down on the library lawn, I saw the two factions yelling back and forth at each other, and it was pretty eye-opening to me, because I really lived a pretty sheltered life, especially after my mother died, because my dad just was so protective of me. As a young person, I rode and showed horses, and that was my savior growing up, were the horses. And I spent most of my time at the barn. That's where I escaped as a teenager, when I didn't want to be home and didn't want to be told what to do. I just went to the barn. And so a lot of things were new to me here. And my high school, I remember during my senior year, besides the two exchange students that we had, a young black man came in the middle of our senior year. And it was all about integration. He was all about integration. He was a very, very good athlete. He was a very good student. He had been raised in a very middle-class home in not the black area of town, because there were two areas of town at that point in time in Oklahoma City. And so I don't know that it was a great experiment, if you will, because he fit right in. And I never heard anybody say a disparaging remark about him, So that was kind of my first taste of having somebody around that didn't look like me. And then I came up here and it was like, whoa, this is crazy. And at the time, the fourth floor of the Union, the Starlight Terrace up there, that was the place where the independent students went. The first floor was where the Greeks went, and the fourth floor was where the independents went. And there were a lot of international students up there on the fourth floor, and we sat up there and would play cards. And I really did get a great education outside the classroom. I really, truly did. Yeah. It was wonderful.
And then graduation came. Did your dad come up for that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it was, with not over 900, well, that was my high school class, but there were a bunch in my freshman class too. It was in the stadium.
Okay.
It was in the stadium. We were on the floor, and the parents and people were up in the stands. And I remember it was real warm. And we were in those caps and gowns. And people started leaving before it was over with. There would be parents standing up going, come on. And, kids were getting up and leaving too. My dad didn't give me that signal. But my graduation, I had forgotten about that. It was in the stadium. So.
And that would have been 1972?
72. Mm-hmm.
And then you went to top school
for a year, and then I came back and worked at Stillwater Medical. I worked at Stillwater Medical first, and then I worked at the Student Health Center. I was in medical records at Stillwater Medical for a while.
And any time during that time you met your significant other?
Yeah, both of them.
I didn't know how to ask that question.
My first husband and I met when we were in undergraduate school.
Okay.
And lovely, lovely man. We were just way too young to have gotten married. And we were married for a while. I don't know how long. But, and then he moved back home. He lived in a small town west of Stillwater. His father was the banker there, and he was actually, you could go get a loan for a car from his dad at the bank, and he'd open one drawer and write you the loan, and he'd open another drawer and you get your license tag, and another drawer and he'd sell you the insurance, But we were way too young to get married, just way too young to get married. And he had gone home, and I hadn't seen him in years and years and years. And one day, a couple of years ago, I saw this man walking at Walmart coming towards me in one of those bigger aisles where there's stuff in the middle. I was on one side and he was on the other. And I thought, that looks like him. And so I stopped and turned around, and he was stopped and turned around, and we both went. And then I stopped again, and we did that 3 times. And then he just kind of went like this and walked over to me, and we had a lovely reunion and really nice time. So he lives in Stillwater now, and I do see him occasionally. But then I was single for quite a while. I pretty much thought I wasn't ever going to get married again. And then I met my daughter's father. And he was he worked for the university. He was pilot, was charter pilot. He flew people to wherever they needed to go. You might have a department head that called and said, I've got a meeting I've got to go to in Colorado Springs, and he'd fly them. Or a lot of their business too, and it was all OSU. The OSU owned the flight service. They would fly people to Tulsa or Oklahoma City to catch planes. They'd fly them, and yeah.
That would be nice.
Yeah, wouldn't it though? And there were a lot of perks with that job. He was allowed to take that plane. If he wanted to take me to dinner in Tulsa, we could take one of the planes. Now, I'm sure it's not that way anymore, but things were different back then. And he and I were married for 8-10 years. Had my daughter. She's my only child. She's now 45. I'm very fond of telling people I was 8 when I had her. But she works for the Edmond Chamber of Commerce. Yeah. And also is an OSU grad. She got her degree here. Yes. So I'm very proud of that. And her daddy got his degree here.
Okay.
So.
Orange closets then.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, cut me and it's going to come out orange. It just is. I grew up at OSU grew me up. I didn't grow up. OSU grew me up, and the experiences that I was offered and the people that I met. And, it's just, OSU was my second parent, almost, it felt like. And it was, I'm not on I've been retired for 5 years, so I'm not on campus much anymore, but it always felt like home here. Always felt like home. I never, ever, when I came here in 68, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, how do I find things? And maybe that's just a, cocky 18-year-old. I wasn't afraid of anything, I thought. But it was just always comfortable here. And the people, by and large, I think are some of the greatest people ever. I really do think this town and this university has some really wonderful people. And of course, over the years, I've worked with many of them, from the business college to the vet school and back and forth, because I was always the one that got called if there was a mental health issue. My staff didn't like to go out at 3 a.m. Go figure. But I truly didn't mind it. I love doing emergency work. And on average, I probably got called out twice a week in the middle of the night. I was very, very good friends with all police officers because that's usually who called me. And 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 I loved it. I loved it.
Well, we should probably stop and let you talk a little bit more about that for those who might not know
What I did.
Yeah, what you did. Yeah.
Well, let's see. I worked at the Student Health Center, and that's when I started graduate school, and continued working there until graduate school got to the place where I couldn't work, where I had to do internships and practicums. And of course, I did all of those downstairs in student mental health because I already had the connections. It was the path was paved in front of me.
That's where you wanted to land when you finished?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to work down there.
Okay.
And pretty much that's what I did. Dr. Maxwell left. There was, when university counseling and student mental health combined, there's growing pains in anything like that. And Dr. Maxwell was eligible for for retirement, I believe, and she left at that, not then, but a year or two later. And that's when I became coordinator, and then I became director. But I did the emergency work all the way through, from the time I started graduate school. I did call out. And I don't think we really enjoy anything that we're not pretty good at. The things I'm terrible at, I don't want to go do. As evidenced by my messy house, but I loved going out and helping people. And I also thought, this came more after I had my daughter, but I thought, if she was at college somewhere and she was in trouble, I would really expect somebody from that university to be there when I got to the emergency room. And I just felt like it was the right thing to do. I felt like there needed to be somebody there from OSU, a representative, because we were their home now. And I think people really did appreciate that. I know they did. Dr. Bird was very good at covering for me. If I was going to go out of town on vacation or whatever, I'd just call the emergency room and say, hey, you've got Dr. Bird's number. I'm gone. Don't call me, call her. And she'd come out in the middle of the night too. She's very good at that kind of work as well. I learned a lot from her in her tenure. She'd been here about 3 or 4 months, and we had the first plane crash. And she and I spent probably the next 2 years in a car driving around to different homes and doing different things and planning memorials and doing all the things that we didn't know we needed to do but felt like the right thing at the time. I mean, there's no way to prepare for that. I've spoken in classes, not so much anymore. I've been retired 5 years, so they kind of don't think about it anymore as far as a speaker. But it's hard to explain how you're going to respond to a crisis. There's some basic things you can do, but every one of them's different. They'll remember the 10 crash, very different from the women's basketball crash where the four people were killed. And that was very different from the parade crash. Everything, like I said, there's basic things you do in crisis response, but you really got to be able to go with what's going on. And even in moving from family to family, one family may need one thing, and that's the last thing the next family needs. So you kind of go in and be quiet and observe and figure out what they do need.
Had you learned that in graduate school, or did you learn it on your on the job?
On the fly. And that was part of why it was so good to be with Lee, especially on that first plane crash, because she would notice things that I wouldn't, and I would notice things that she wouldn't. And of course, as soon as we had left a home or a funeral or wherever we went, we'd get in the car and we'd be like, and it'd be like, well, didn't you see that little brother just disappeared? And I'd be like, no, I didn't see that, and and I took notes. I wrote. She drove and I wrote. And those notes were so invaluable. I'm sure I still have them. I don't know where they are. Probably in a box in the attic. But those notes proved, we wrote down mom and dad's name, siblings' names, the dog's name, big OU fans if you saw, OU paraphernalia in their home, don't bash OU while you're there. And those were the kinds of things when I taught crisis intervention that were good, solid things that I could tell people. But actually doing it, it's hard. It's hard. I found, and I didn't know, and I don't know if losing my mother at such a young age added to this or not. But I did find out at one point that I could sit with other people's pain and be okay. I could get in there with them. But when I got outside, I could shed it and didn't take it all on myself. But, of course, they tell you in graduate school, well, don't show emotion and don't do this, and don't do that, which never made sense to me. And I remember one professor at one time saying, well, if you want to laugh with your clients, that's fine. I thought, well, if I'm going to laugh, I may cry too. And if I do, I do. So I've always kind of just been a little bit of a rebel. And, it was, I did feel the need, though, when we first were going around to the families' homes to not fall apart in front of them. I really did, because I didn't know any of them. I didn't know any. I knew Bill Teagan, but I didn't know his family. So, and you just don't know what you're going to get. We walk in and have people literally in a ball on the floor, just weeping and weeping. And then we'd have others that were so angry. I remember there was not parents of one of the men that was killed, but more distant relatives. And I remember being in the home where he was there visiting with his family. And I remember him saying, well, I'll never walk back in Gallagher-Iva until it's named, and he named his loved one. So if it had been me, until they rename it Suzanne Burks Hall. And, just those very unrealistic things. And he wasn't that way a year later. He wasn't near as bitter and mad a year later. It's hard.
Those raw emotions.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And my experience only, I'm not saying this is in the counseling books or any other book, but I have found that men have a lot more difficulty expressing true grief. Now, not the parents of these kids. They couldn't help it. The grief, it wasn't like turn it on, turn it off. But there were some other men that were associated and stuff. And they were, I learned that the ones that really couldn't handle that depth of grief, they were the ones that were angry. And it was okay. It was okay. Whatever they needed to do. And I can honestly tell you, of all the ones I'm still in touch with, which is most of them, certainly not Bjorn Wahlstrom's family, but everybody else, they've all made it through, and they've all found their new normal.
20 years it may take. You never know, I guess, how long it's going to take.
Yeah.
Individuals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean it's gone. I have been blessed to become very, very close with Karen Hancock and her family and Will's family. I actually lived at her parents' house for a while I was building a home. They're just the most wonderful people. Both families are just incredible people. And Karen and I had a conversation about this not long ago, probably within the last 6 months. We're dear friends. We're best friends. And I told her, I said, and I think it was after some particularly fun, silly, whatever, good dinner, good food type time at her folks' house and the family that's still in Tulsa drives in. And I mean, it's a crowd when they have a gathering. But I said, that's the big family that I never had. And I'm part of it now. I'm part of one. I said, sometimes I feel guilty, Karen, because the worst thing you'll ever be through in your life, you ever have to go through in your life, has brought me a family and joy and so much. And of course, she just was like, "Oh, don't be stupid," But I there is some guilt that runs through there. The worst thing she'll ever go through, was one of the best things that ever happened to me, in a way. I mean, her little girl, who's a junior, I believe, at Northwestern now, was 2 months old when her daddy died. So, and I did a lot of babysitting early on. I babysat Andy a lot when Karen finally started going out again. And she would go with her parents and they'd go to Tulsa. Her parents moved here after Will died. And, but they had tickets to the Performing Arts Center over in Tulsa. And so when they'd go over there, I'd get to babysit Andy. So
You become an aunt, maybe.
I've become something, I'm not sure what. So one of Karen's cousins, one of Karen's cousins, somehow dubbed me Groovy Susie. And she would dance when she'd say it. She'd say, "Groovy Susie." And so the whole family calls me Groovy Susie now, which is fine. That's, I don't mind being Groovy Susie.
Well, during all that time, what did you do for self-care? I mean, it was emotional for everyone, but you too. I mean, what type of things for whom?
I don't remember.
You just got through it too, huh?
Yeah, and Lee Bird and I did a lot together. There was a time, I mean, the better part of the next 2 years I spent on the plane crash in some form or fashion, the first plane crash. And there was a long time in there where Lee and I would go to breakfast almost every morning. And we didn't necessarily talk about the plane crash or anything about work or anything else, but I think we were a strong support for each other. I really do. She was certainly the vice president we needed at the time. Dr. Ron Beer, who was the VP that hired me, phenomenal man. And I mean, he's the one I call boss still to this day, but unbelievable. But he himself has said to me, "Oh, Susie," he said, I was grateful that I was retired, and Lee and I just kind of jumped in with both feet and hit the ground running. And a couple of years later, we were like, maybe we can take a vacation day. Where are you going? I'm going here. I was dating a man who lived out of town at the time. And so I did have a good motivation to get out of town every now and then and go see him, go visit him. He lived in Branson. And so that was a big lifesaver for me too. And I still love Branson. I call that my happy place.
And how old would your daughter have been?
When the plane crashed, she was born in 76.
So she would have been a little bit older.
Yeah, she was a teen.
Teenager.
Yeah, and she got it. She understood it. And she really was real good about being left all the time. She was already driving and stuff. But she was really, really good about sharing her mom. And she and Karen are real good friends. She and several of the families, the Weibergs and several of the families she got close to, because after a time, we have a family dinner once a year, and then they go to a basketball game on the closest game to the anniversary. And she's gone up there with me several times, as has my grandson. Now and they're bringing grandkids, and it's still a very sacred gathering in a way, but it's a happy gathering. And I think they're around what I would call their real family, because they're the only ones that know what that was like to go through that.
We kind of bonded for forever.
Yeah. And I have to say, during the time, I've been negligent in not mentioning this person, but during the time that we were responding, and a couple of years later when we built the memorial in Colorado on the site, I mean, it's not right where the plane crashed, but it's 50 yards from there. Dr. David Bosserman, who was the vice president for finance, I don't know. Yeah. And I had never known, I had heard his reputation, and a lot of people were scared of him. And I called I can remember calling Pat Murphy and saying, I've got to go meet David Bosserman, because he was handling this whole other side of everything. He was handling everything in Colorado and buying the land. Well, we ended up not buying it. It was donated where the memorial is. But and then I get a call from his right arm that says, hey, Bosserman wants you to go to Colorado with us to look at this, and this about the memorial. So being a little scaredy cat that I was, I called Pat Murphy, and he said, well, I am so sorry. My allergies are killing me. Pat said, well, you better put on your big girl britches, because he's going to make you make your bones. And I thought, well, what does that mean? But again, I think everything happens for reasons in our life. And I was raised by a man, a single man, who was expected the best from you, who could be very gruff. But I think, like I say, I think all things work together for a reason. And being the daughter of my dad certainly helped me out with Dr. Bosserman, with Dr. B. And I ended up just absolutely adoring the man. Is he still scary? Well, probably not now, because he doesn't have his wife's the boss at home and he's retired. But yeah, he always had that little bit of, okay, is this a good day to go in and see him kind of thing. But what a wonderful man. And I never went to him and asked for one thing for those families or anything about that plane crash that he didn't say yes. The only thing he ever argued with me on, and it was the day before we were dedicating the memorial, and we brought 400 people in, family. And we were out there on the site, and the memorial's right off the road, and then you walk about 50 yards, and there's a big post out there, and that's where the plane came to rest. And I said, David, it's hot. And I don't even remember what month it was or anything when we dedicated it. I'd have to go back and look. I said, because that's basically mountain desert. Colorado mountain desert is where it is the area in where it crashed. I said, it's really hot out here. I said, we need to figure out a way to get some water out here for those people tomorrow. I don't need any water running. And I said, no, I'm very serious. I mean it. We need to get water out of here. He said, oh, you're over it. And I thought, fine. And of course, we got out there the next morning, and there was a big stock tank with bottled water ice down. But that was who he was. He'd give you all sorts of trouble and make you think he wasn't going to do what you suggested and then do it. I said, well, I see you got some water the next day. And he said, yeah, I thought that'd be a good idea. And that's, so he was he was just a delight to work with. He would probably be angry with me if he knew I called him a delight. He much preferred that rough, gruff reputation, I think. But wonderful man. Absolutely wonderful. And, he was in Vietnam. And he was on the ground in Vietnam. And he knew how to handle that kind of stuff. And he was one of many cogs that fit to make that a wonderful response. And we learned from that, unfortunately, for the next one. I know, but, and Dr. Halligan, there's nobody better. I adore Dr. and Mrs. Halligan. They were so great during that time. So great. And still are. We're still good friends. Karen and I go visit them a lot. So we just show up, and it's always fun.
Well, let's back up then. The first time you went out to the site, was that for the dedication or had you gone before? No, you said you'd gone before.
We had gone, because we wrecked a car.
Okay.
We
That's
went
a
out.
story.
We went out. Okay, stick with me because I'm not good with the directions. You got off the highway and you got on this long, long, long road, dirt road, gravel dirt road, and drove a long ways, and then you turned left onto another gravel road, and the memorial's right there. So we were on this long road. Nancy Bosserman's right arm, and Bosserman and I. Bosserman was driving. I was in the front. Nancy was in the back. And I was just about to say something to him because he was coming down that first long dirt road, gravel road. Because I was getting kind of scared. He was driving pretty fast. And I was just about to say something. And about that time, he lost control. And we went like this, and like this, and like this, and like this. And we went, ultimately, we got in the grass over here. And we went end over end twice, and then barrel rolled it about 4 or 5 times. And the car ended up with Bosserman above me. No, I was on top. He was on the bottom. So the car ended up like this, and I was the one that could get out. Because as we rolled it, I remember looking one time, and I saw my window shatter. And then later on, when we'd gotten out, and we were all fine. And I went and walked back up there where we were, and that window was still in the shape of a window, just shattered on the ground. It just shattered, and there it was. But I crawled out the window, and Bosserman couldn't get out. He's a large man. And so he was trapped. I got Nancy out, and a guy on a tractor was coming down the road, and he had already called 911, and I called 911. And Dr. Bosserman had been out there before, several times before. And so he knew the law enforcement people that responded to the crash and all that. So, they came in force. It wasn't very long before there was lights and sirens and, and they made us go to the hospital in an ambulance, and we were all fine. Dr. Bosserman had a cut on his earlobe, and it was on this ear, and of course the car ended up like this, so he was down here and I was above him, and he told everybody that I stood on his head to get out of the car, and that's what cut his ear.
You had your seatbelt on, or that wouldn't.
Oh, we did. Oh yeah, we had our seatbelts on. I was hanging in my seatbelt when we stopped. So we had gone out there before, certainly before the crash, and people in Strasburg, it's all family now. It's all family. We'd go and they'd take us out to this little dive restaurant or whatever, and we just became part of the Strasburg family. So,
Well, your first time at the site, you wanted to say anything about that?
the memorial wasn't done, and what happened is Dr. Bosserman, after we got unwrecked and got around to the site, he looked at me. He said, okay, I want you to come with me. And I said, where? He said, just come on. And like I said, the memorial's here. And if you walk west, I believe, I'm a little directionally challenged. That's where the big pole is, where the plane came to rest. And we took off and went way, what I believe is to the north, to the end of that pasture, clear to the next road, and turned around. He said, okay, I'm going to tell you what happened. And he walked me through. But part of what he did in the military was clean up plane crashes. And then he'd been out there with the FAA and with NTSB and all those people. And he said, I want to tell you what happened. You need to know what happened. And, you know, he told me about how the plane was coming in and where it was. And the wires, the electrical wires and things cut off part of the top, not the top of the plane, but the wing that sticks up. It's not a wing or rudder or whatever it is. And then, you know, that got it all about balance, and this happened and that. And he walked me all the way down that pasture until we got to the resting spot. And he said, what do you think? I said, I don't know. I don't know what I think. This is a lot. He said, well, you need to know it. You need to know it. You're going to be out here with these people. And, you know, if you're going to cry and carry on, you need to do it now. I was like, no. But it was very emotional, the first, and certainly walking through everything that happened. You know, we're walking down this pasture and he's saying, and the plane tipped, and that's where the wing came off, and, you know, and I'm making that up. I don't remember if he said that or not. But he told me pretty much everything that happened to the plane. And it did come in on, it flipped over. It came to rest on its top. So, and you know, it was 2 years, I think, maybe 3, before the memorial was all done, and before we brought those 400 people out to dedicate the memorial from the time of the crash. And the day before this is typical of Bosserman. The day before, we'd been out there 2 or 3 days. And I said, hey, we need to get some people. We need to go out and walk that pasture. We need to be arm to arm, and we need to walk the pasture. He said, what do you mean walk the pasture? I said, not the whole pasture, but where the plane landed. And of course, once it hit the ground, it slid some too. He said, why? And I said, because we're going to find plane pieces. And I said, I don't know what we're going to find. Who knows what we're going to find? And so we went out there, and they got a bunch of people from Strasburg Fire Department, and we all just went out there and stood arm to arm and just walked back and forth 2 or 3 times. And we had several black trash bags full of stuff. I still carry 2 pieces of that plane all the time with me. But it was amazing how, and I'm going to tell you about Boston. He griped about it the whole time till we got out there and he saw how much stuff and I think you could still go out there probably and find stuff. I went out several years later because I wanted my daughter to see it and be there and experience it. And we found some pieces of airplane. So, and I've talked to other people that have just gone by because they're going to Colorado going skiing, and they found stuff. So it was just morselized. Yeah. So it was pretty emotional thing. I really believe, I have a pretty strong faith, and I really believe that God protected me through a lot of that. Because in some ways it's more emotional for me now than it was then. I was on the job then.
You have to be strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I look back and think, how did you do that?
Well, then fast forward to the dedication. What do you remember from that day? Besides the water being there.
The water was there. I remember it being, it was a very solemn day. And certainly the actual dedication, I don't remember anything about it. I don't remember who talked. I know Dr. Halligan talked. but I don't remember who else talked or anything. Because I was keeping an eye on families. It was real hot. And we had one area where it was covered. And especially Will Hancock's grandma. She's passed away a couple of years ago, but everybody called her, she was the matriarch of the family. And Gran. Everybody called her Gran. Her name was Nellie. But everyone called her Gran. And I worried about her because she seemed pretty old and feeble to me even then. Well, she just died a few years ago, so she was probably in better health than I was. But I worried about some of those people, and I think I was more in work mode, probably. I can get much more emotional about it all now than I did then. I had some pretty good walls up. They didn't always work. They didn't always work. And the better I got to know Karen and her family and Will's family, the more faulty my walls became. So Karen and I worked with the 3 young widows that had children right after the crash. It was Karen Hancock and Lou Instra, the trainer, and Durfee, Kendall Durfee's widow. And I always told them, if you ever need anything, day or night, just give me a call. And I took them to my house. I had them meet at my house because I wanted them to get to know each other because they were all in the same, same general age, same situation and everything. And that worked. I mean, I think it worked the best it could. But Karen and I got real close. And the one thing it did for Karen and I was open that line of communication up. And she used to call me. She lived across Highway 51. I was on the north side and she was on the south side. And she would run from her house across 51 and over into my neighborhood. And then we'd walk my neighborhood. So she'd run first and then we'd walk. And that was a pretty special time. We spent a lot of hours walking that neighborhood. And I loved hearing Will's stories. I loved hearing all of that stuff, And I had met Will 2 weeks before the plane crash, just by chance. I was over at the athletic department for something, and I don't even know why I was there. But ran into he and somebody I knew, and they introduced me to him. So I had met him. But, there were just lots of little things that happened.
Well, did you have anything to do with planning the memorial service in Gallagher?
I had some input. Natalie Watkins was the PIO person then. She was phenomenal at stuff like that. I mean, just really, and she thought about every detail, I'm telling you. But I helped a little bit, but I wasn't instrumental in that, except other than being there. And I did sit with the basketball team.
Okay.
Coach Sutton asked me to sit with the basketball team. So.
And there were teddy bears for?
Yeah, I still got mine. They were little teddy bears, and they handed them to all the family and, all that kind of stuff. There's several mementos like that. I still have my teddy bear sitting in my office at home.
President Halligan asked me to be sure and have you tell about him reading to the children.
Now, see, you're going to make me teary. I don't know where we were. I think maybe Lou Instras. And I think it was just me and Halligan. I don't know if Ann was there. But I couldn't find Halligan. I was ready to go. I mean, I've done our thing, and it was just kind of naturally winding down. And I'm like, oh, where'd Halligan go? And I think it was at Lou Instra's house. I said, well, I seem to have lost my president. And they said, well, I can't remember the little girl's name who's in college now. But somebody said, well, so-and-so took him back towards her room. I said, oh, okay. So I said, may I go back there? And they said, yeah, sure. And I went back there. and he's sitting, Indian style on the floor with her right here, and they're reading, and there's about 4 books over here. And I just walked in and, of course, little kids' books are very short. And he got to the end of the book and he closed it up and he set it over there. So I thought, that's the pile they've already been through. But, he much preferred, and he spent a lot of time with the kids, not just Lewinster's kids, but if there were kids around. I can remember at one point when we went to Karen's house, he held Andy at 2 months old, comfortable as he could be. So that's what that was about. He was, when I couldn't find him, and he was in there reading with the kids. So I think that's what he's referring to, or something I don't remember. He was phenomenal. And he was so appreciative of us. And when I say us, I'm kind of meaning me and Lee Bird. They had us over to dinner a few times and just, different things. But anytime I saw him, whether it was on campus or if I needed to run something by him in his office or in the union or whatever, and to this day, when I see Dr. Halligan, he always embraces me, and he always gets right in my ear and he says, "You're spectacular." First time he said it, it was like, I've arrived. Can't get any better than this. He thinks I'm spectacular. Because, by then I was like madly in love with him. Not romantically, but just in love with him. But yeah, he still does that to this day. Every time I see him.
It seems that all the right people were at the right place at the right time, myself with the lead team and the administrative team and all of that. Just, it's amazing.
And other than Dr. Bosserman working cleanup crews, if you will, in Vietnam, none of us had any experience. None of us knew what we were doing.
Not that type of crisis management anyway.
We met, I got the call about 9:00 at night from the OSU police. And as was my habit, when I'd get that call, and that was early for me to get a call out with 9, because, kids don't get drunk and stupid till 12 or 1. But I was always getting dressed before I got off the phone when they were still giving me the information, Jumped in the car and I took off towards the basketball office. No, I went to the airport first. But I got out to the airport and I missed the other plane coming back. So they were already there. And I just went to the basketball office. I ran into a highway patrolman who's a friend of mine. As I was turning out of my neighborhood onto 51, he was turning in. We lived in the same neighborhood. And he said, "Well, you're going to work, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "What do you know?" And he said, "Susan, it's not good. It's not good." I said, "Okay." He said, "I'll be praying for you." I said, "Thank you." And I didn't know how much we would need. But we finally ended up at the basketball office. And Eddie, I sat with a lot of players. You just walked around in there. I just walked around, and if I'd see a player sitting over in a corner up against the wall or whatever, I'd just go sit down by him and put my hand on his knee or his hand or something. Not say a word, and they'd start talking, what do you say? How you doing? No. There's no words. There's no words. And sometimes it never moved into a conversation. I just sat with them for a while. And if I didn't feel like I should be saying anything, I didn't. And then one of the coaches, Cyprian, they called him Sip. Cyprian, I think was his name, an assistant coach, or he may have been a graduate student, came and got me and said, "Coach Sutton wants you in his office." I said, "Okay." And I kind of knew Coach Sutton, but not really. We'd say hello. But he wanted me to sit in his office while he called all parents. And he insisted that nobody contact those families except him. Nobody. That was very hard on him. Extremely hard on him. Looking back on it, I feel like I watched him age with every call. He was phenomenal. He was phenomenal throughout all of that. Of course, I'd always thought he was great, just knowing him from afar. But I learned a whole new side to Eddie Sutton, and he was amazing. And he directed a lot of our response. There were things he wanted and things he didn't want. We ran everything past him.
It's a long weekend.
It's a long 2 years.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah. And he called me off and on at least once a week for the next 2 years.
Mhm.
And sometimes it would just be like, "Hey, Susie girl, how are you?" "I'm okay. How are you, coach?" "Well, getting by. Hard part of our season's about to start." "I know. I've been watching." He says, "I know. I see you up there." Of course, that was maybe a year later when things don't get back to normal. It's whatever the new normal is going to be. It's a whole new normal.
Well, and since we talked about him, let's talk about the other member of the lead team, Leon Jones. Do you want to say,
Leon,
how did you help him through that?
we helped each other.
Well, he was in Colorado for what, 8 days?
11 days. I believe it's 11, and I talked to him every day, every night. Leon and I had gotten to be, I met him one of the first days he was on the OSU Police Department. I was working in student mental health down in the basement of the Student Health Center. Well, at the end of the hall, you could go outside and go up these real steep steps, and you'd be there right by the emergency room. And that's where we all went to smoke. So we're all up there puffing away. And I looked, and here came this man on a bike. He was on bike patrol. And I reached over and touched my friend's arm, and I said, "Oh my." And because, you've met him. He's a bear of a man and a very handsome young man, I think. And he came over and said, "Y'all mind if I smoke one with you?" And of course, this is all, long before anybody thought it was bad to smoke. All of us are kind of weird now. But I said, "Sure." And that's how I met him. But we worked together a whole lot after that between the police and student mental health response. And we got to be really good friends. Really. Leon is probably my best friend in the whole world. We've been there for each other through thick and thin, really. And I don't know how long he was here before that plane crash happened. I don't remember how long. But he was seasoned. He'd been around. And I was in the meeting to go back the night of the crash. We all ended up out at what used to be Frontier Engineering out on the highway, because they had a big conference room, and that's where we met afterwards. And we were there till like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And we were planning the memorial starting then. We were planning this, we were planning that. And I remember Everett Eaton was the chief of police. And somebody said to Eaton, "Well, we need a police presence to go." Bowserman, probably. I need an officer. Because we're going to be talking to fire guys and officers out there, and I need somebody. And you could just see Eaton, and he looked over at his right hand, the assistant chief, and I can't even think of his name now. And he was like, "I think Leon Jones would be a real good choice." And he was the best choice. Neither one of them wanted to be out there. Leon, it was okay, and he's well known in Strasburg now and well appreciated. And he was so instrumental in a lot of things that happened. And I think, are you going to talk to Dr. Bosserman, or have you?
I tried to, but his health would not let him at this point.
Oh, I was kind of afraid that might be the case. Where are they living, in Tulsa?
Iowa.
Iowa?
Is that right? Idaho. Washington.
That's where he used to go hunting.
Yeah, Idaho.
You know, he almost got arrested in the Oklahoma City airport one time because he used to go on these big hunting trips up there. One time, he and his buddies, they hunted too long the last day, and then they just threw everything they quick change clothes, threw everything in the suitcases and hit the road, and they got to the airport, and they saw knives, hunter's knives and things through the x-ray. So they opened up their suitcases, and they were just all bloody because they hadn't washed anything off or anything from hunting. And, because they had to get whatever they were hunting to a certain point to where they could leave it there, have it processed, and then shipped to Oklahoma. And he said, he thought that was the funniest thing ever. He said, that woman opened that suitcase and was like, she was just sure I was a mass murderer. But that's the kind of stuff he just thought was funny as it could be, But, he and Leon got real close too. He was really good for Leon, I think. I mean, Leon was a young man. I wasn't that old. But Leon was young. And it grew him up real fast. He always had a real good head on his shoulders. Very solid kid. Not a kid anymore. But that plane crash made a real difference in his life. A real difference in his life. And of course, then he's responded to the other two events after that. I sometimes feel like not you and I, but just we in general negate the others a little bit because it's almost like, really? And it happened again. Oh, yeah, and then it happened again. It's just, how's that happen 3 times to one university? My older brother he did his undergraduate here. And he's 9 years older than I am, so he was here long before I was. And I remember him calling me after the Budke crash. And he lives in Sarasota, Florida. And he said, how's that happen? That was the first words he said. He said, how does that happen? I said, Ronnie, I don't know. I said, my head's just spinning. I said, I've been out all night, at this house and the other house. And he said, that doesn't happen in a million years to one place, but twice. And then after the parade crash, I called him. I said, well, you're probably not going to hear this on the national news, but it's happened again. Yeah, he was just, like I said, he was just blown away. And he loves OSU still. Now, he went on to pretty big things after. I think he didn't graduate from OSU. He left OSU and went to Stanford. And then after he got his undergraduate, he went to Harvard Graduate School. So he got all the smarts.
Just the two of you?
No, a sister in between us. They were my half-brother and half-sister, same daddy. And wasn't raised with them. Well, more with my brother than my sister. And my sister passed away last year, but my brother still, he just came and visited not long ago. Anytime he has business in Oklahoma City, he comes up here, which is nice. And I make the trip to Sarasota every now and then because that's gorgeous. I love Sarasota. If I could afford to live there, I would probably move there. But it's a retirement town, basically, but it's a pretty expensive one. Happy right where I am.
So Leon Jones responded to the Arkansas. Was he on the lead team for the Arkansas?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So he had.
And I was talking to him. Yeah. I mean, he was probably the first person they called. I imagine they called him before they did me. And once again, I talk to him every day, at least once a day.
Well, how did the 2001 and the 2011 compare, for lack of a better word? I mean, you had the previous experience to help this time around.
Yeah, and I think it really did help a lot. You'd have to talk to Leon about the response we got back from either the Strasburg people or the wherever in Arkansas it was. I don't even remember. For me, it was almost like, here we go again. You know, I mean, for the first one, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Why are they calling me? What do they expect me to do? And by the time the second one was here, it was like, okay, let's saddle up. Let's go. And so I don't want to minimize that in any way, shape, or form. I was with somebody, I don't know who I was with. We called the girls' team together at 6 o'clock the next morning and met in Gallagher-Iba. And I'm sure it was Coach Annan and somebody else there. And they wanted me there because they wanted to introduce me. And it was different, but I got much closer to the team on the Budke crash than I did on the 10 crash. I think the team had a lot of help. Marilyn Middlebrook, I don't know if you know her. She worked in athletics, and she had I don't know if she has a counseling degree or not, but she was in like academic services. And she loved getting close to the guys. She really enjoyed being close to the teams. And I think she helped a lot just because they already knew her and everything. And I did go around them a lot. I mean, they all knew me by name for sure. We had me around. Sutton made sure of that. He wanted me around enough to where they didn't feel like they were calling a stranger, you know. And they all had my phone number. But the second one, it was just very different. Very different.
Did you go to the site?
No. Leon did. Leon helped clean up. I've not yet been to the site, which is, I really should go, and I want to go. And I go to, like I said, I go to Branson all the time, so I could very easily go over Arkansas and back up through. Leon I was going to go early on, and he said, no, Susan, I don't want you to. Don't go. And he was being very protective, and I'm not sure why. I didn't ask. You know, I think it was, you know, the first plane just, I don't want to say this on tape.
Did Dr. Bossima go, or was it just Leon since?
Oh, there was a team that went, but I don't think Bosserman went. I mean, it was 10 years later, so I think he'd retired. I think he had retired. I'm not sure who all went. Are you going to interview Leon?
Already have?
Oh, have you? Isn't he something?
Yes.
Isn't he something?
Yes. My heart went out to him, yes.
I mean, and I'm sure he told you he was thrust into something just like that he had.
He said he got his initiation in 1995 with Murrah bombing.
Yeah.
And he was down for training or something.
He was in Cleat when that was going on. Yes. And I'd done a lot of work, a lot of crisis response. And I also did go down, I worked at the Murrah building. And I just, there were groups of psychologists going down there together, and I didn't know or anything. I drove down there and stumbled in, and they said, come on in, we need you. And that was probably, well, it was the first I ever saw that kind of carnage and death, and, you know. Like I said, last time I was in Colorado, we were still picking up plane parts. And when something like that happens, there's people parts too. I remember when we scanned the passenger, because I made them, somebody found this bone about that long, about that big around. And I was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I said, well, give it to me. And I took it and got it back up here. And I don't remember who I took it to, but I took it to somebody. And I said, I need to know right now. Because I thought, if this is a human bone, we need to go back up there and do this again. And it turned out to be something else, a bird or a cow. I don't even remember what it was. And I thought, oh, thank you, God. Thank you, Lord.
It's what you think of. I mean,
Oh, yeah. And it just horrified me that there might be still remains out there, because you don't know. You know, the plane had some green on it. I know that, because my little piece that I carried has some green paint on it, unless I've rubbed it off. I don't like to fly anymore.
I was going to ask that. If, you
Totally changed it.
do if you have to. That's good.
I grew up with an uncle who was a captain for TWA. I don't know if you're old enough to remember Trans World Airlines.
Yeah.
And my cousin, his son, was the youngest man to ever be named captain for Braniff Airlines. So I grew up in kind of a flying family. And then I married a pilot, and I was fine flying with Charlie, you know, my ex. But then I got scared of flying. And it was before the crashes, but I got a whole lot more scared after the crashes. You know, I just kept looking down. And of course, I'd ask Dr. Bosterman, because I was flying with him most of the time. And I'd be like, how high off the ground are we? And he'd look, and I don't even remember how high the guys were when the plane started coming down. But that was always the height he told me, because he knew what I was doing. I was trying to say, you know, what did it look like? What was it like? And he always gave me that number, whatever it is. And I was okay flying then, right after the crash. I think maybe I was okay because Bosterman would have made too much fun of me if I wasn't. But I don't enjoy it at all now. Not at all. I would rather drive. You know, I'll leave a day early. Y'all fly and I'll meet you there. We'll make it at the same time. I just don't enjoy it at all. I'm very, very nervous. And is it related directly to those plane crashes? I don't know. Mm-hmm.
It just is.
Yeah, it just is. It just is.
That plane crash changed your, I don't know.
Changed everything.
Changed everything. Didn't it?
Yeah, it changed. It certainly changed my career, and it changed me as a person. You know, it changed me as a person.
Did you find that you needed, or that you wanted to take more, I don't know, training in grief counseling, that type of thing?
Mm-mm.
You'd been there, so you worked through
I
all
lived
that.
it too.
Yeah.
You know, I lived it. And I didn't grieve my mother until years later. You know, you're a kid. You're 11 years old. And every time I looked sad, they ran me out to the barn to ride horses. So, which was, like I said, it saved me, you know. Certainly probably kept me off the streets and not pregnant in high school, you know, because I rode all the way until I was 18 and came up here. But, yeah, but that first plane crash is probably the single most impactful event of my life, including my mother's death. Well, I was just a kid, you know. And I was sad and I missed her, but life went on. You know, I probably grieve her more now than I ever did back then. But yeah, that's probably the thing. That first crash was probably the single most impactful in many ways, in just dealing with it, in, you know, blindly pawing our way through it, trying to do the best we could do, to meeting all the families, to still being close to several of them. And it made me a different person. It really did. It changed me. Some of my former employees might argue with this, but not near as quick to anger or as harsh as I was before. So, like I said, some of my former employees might argue with that, but and I don't know. I have such a different perspective on what matters and what doesn't. So what if you didn't get to buy that new car because it was too expensive? Who cares? You got a car. A lot worse things than any of that kind of junk. But I had a really meaningful professional career in life, and retirement's been grand. Retirement has been, and I'm still close to the families, and I, of course, still go to the family dinner and do all that stuff with them. And
the run.
well, I'm there. I'm there. Nobody said I ran. I ran it one time with Karen. We did the 5K one time. She said, "What, do you have goals?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to do it in under an hour, and I want to live." Well, by the end of it, and I kid and say this, it was for Karen, it was like run 2 steps and drag Susie. Run 2 steps and drag. I haven't done it since. That was about 5 years ago, and I have not done it since.
But you helped organize it to
every year.
begin with.
Yeah, and in the beginning. Absolutely. And the counseling center benefits
So we need
from
to
it.
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
How that has
Yeah.
benefited them.
Actually, Kerry Alexander, businessman, lawyer, but he's in he's doesn't have a private practice. He does some other kind of law. He came to me one time right over in the student union, made an appointment and came in, and he's kind of a long, tall drink of water, and I mean this in the most affectionate of ways. Kerry's kind of goofy, and I'd say that if he was sitting right here, but he's also got the sweetest, softest heart, and just a kind, nice, great man, and he's an organizer. And he came into my office and he said, "Okay, I've talked to Bill Hancock about this, Will's daddy." And I said, "Okay," and I'm thinking, where's he coming? What? He got my attention more when he said Bill Hancock. And he went on to explain to me that he had this. The first idea he had was a bike ride from the edge of Stillwater out to Lake Carl Blackwell and back, because he was a bike rider.
Okay.
And then it turned into a run. I don't know how it morphed. But he got to telling me about all this stuff, and he said Bill was real excited about it. Now, whether Bill was at first, I don't know. I haven't ever asked him. But he got my attention, for sure, when he said that. And he said, and I talked to Bill, and I talked to a couple of the other families, and I asked all 3 of them, we're going to have proceeds to this run. We're going to make money off of this run. We'll have to keep some of it to do the run the next year. But the money we have to give, where do you all want it to go? And independently, they all 3 said the counseling center. They said the counseling center was here for us every moment for the first 2 years, at least. And it was really Bill that made the big pitch. And I think Kerry told the others, well, Bill Hancock thought the counseling center, I think. That's how it went, really. But I don't know. But the counseling center has gotten $20,000 a year. And it's all gone, well, when I was the director still, it all went to grief and bereavement counseling and grief and bereavement programming and stuff like that. And, if you have something else that's real important, you can kind of twist it around into a grief thing somehow, So we've been loose with that, and that's okay with the families. I've asked them. And, oh, yeah, of course. But it was just, it was a game changer for the counseling center. I mean, I was able to I got 2 or 3 counselors certified in grief counseling, grief and bereavement counseling. It was amazing. It really was what we were able to do with that. And they still get it, They still have, well, I don't know about if they will this year, but when they present the check to the counseling center last year, they still had me out there with them. Carrie says, as long as I'm down here, you're coming up. Okay. And then the next director after me, my replacement was Dr. Trevor Richardson, who is, he might be a really good one to talk to too, because he was in the trenches. I mean, he was very much behind the scenes, but he and his wife both are therapists that work for me. But Trevor became director of the counseling center after I retired. And then his dream job came along, and he's the resident psychologist in the athletic department now. So, but he did a lot of work with probably individual athletes as much as anybody after that plane crash and stuff. If I'm recalling right. I'm sitting here as I'm saying that thinking, was Trevor here then, or had he come back from his internship yet? But I'm glad he was here. So
getting certified in grief counseling, that has helped with other things that have happened on continuing, I guess.
On a continuing basis. I mean, people, unless you know, most people don't know some of the tragedies that happen every single year on a college campus. Every year.
From suicide to drug overdose and
all sorts of stuff.
sorts of
Car wreck.
Mhm.
I remember, and please don't include this. I want to.
Let's just not say it then.
Okay, I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay.
One of the most hardest for me ever. But
Well, then it certainly had to help when the homecoming parade accident happened.
Yeah.
Crash, whatever.
Yeah.
It's hard to label what that was.
I was out at my friend's out in the country, and got the call. And for some reason, I didn't have a car out there. I think my daughter had dropped me off. I think she was here visiting for the weekend and had dropped me off. And we would have been, the interesting thing is, we would have been at the parade, but my grandson got in trouble that morning. And she finally looked at him, and he just, it was one of those keep on and on and on. And she finally looked at him, she said, "No parade." And I was like, why are you punishing me for him? But so we didn't go to the parade. When we were out at our friend's who owns she raises German Shepherds. And so we were out there, and he got to play with puppies, they wouldn't have told loss for him. But I got the call out there, and I think we had gone out there in her car, and they needed to head on back to Edmond. They live in Edmond. And so Tracy gave me one of her cars. Luckily, she has, trucks and cars and stuff out there for the business. And I drove it back in and just went straight to the emergency room. And I walked into that emergency room, and I thought, it was like a war zone. It was like something you used to see on MASH. Because there were a lot of minor injuries in that too, not just the 4 deaths. So I went straight to the emergency room on that one. And I ended up, the first people I saw were, have you ever been in our emergency room? There's a horseshoe. The end of the horseshoe is the trauma room. That room across. You don't ever want to be in that room. I came in the back door and looked up, and there was this young woman and this older woman standing at the top of that horseshoe. And I'd kind of been briefed that there was a little boy, a little 4-year-old that was hurt. And so I just walked behind the nurse's station and got behind them and looked in that trauma room, and it was that little boy. It was Nash. And his grandma was a nurse. So she knew what was going on. And I just went over to them. I just went right up to them because I had called on the way into town a couple of 3 other people that were showing up. And I don't know if the people that perished, they had to be taken to the hospital because they had to be pronounced dead. So they were somewhere. But anyway, I just walked around and started talking to Nash's grandma and mama. And I spent most of the day with them because I had enough staff there that day that they could take care of the outer stuff. And we life flighted him out, but he didn't make it. He didn't make it. So precious. But she was just, she was so young. I think she was 16 or 17, the mama. And so precious. So, but that one just about did me in. That one just about Nash. The whole thing of, I can't do this anymore. But then Nash being the, at least for me, the center of it for most of the response, that was hard. That was very hard. I don't even know how old my grandson was at the time, but not very far from there probably. That was 2015. He was a little younger, but yeah. And what I was going to tell you, had my grandson not gotten in trouble that morning, and she said no parade, we'd gone to the parade for all of her life. And that corner is right where we stood. Every single year, year after year after year, we probably would have been hit. I mean, right on that corner where that car plowed right into those people. That's where we stood. And so we probably would have been at least hurt. But Chase got in trouble, so we didn't go. I don't believe in coincidences. You know. I told Jennifer later, I said, you better thank me for not going to that parade crash. God needed me alive to help those people. She was just like, oh, mother.
No, he did.
Yeah, I really believe that we would have been seriously injured, if not killed, if we'd have been at that parade. I believe that with all my heart. It didn't dawn on me for about 2 weeks. I really found out exactly what happened in the crash, and I saw the drawings and stuff, and I was like, holy moly. We would have been standing right there. Right off the Hastings parking lot.
Yeah, it seems like this one, that might have been a little, I don't know if harder's the right word, but because it happened in our backyard.
Oh, yeah.
And more students probably.
Well, people saw it. I mean, they saw dead people laying on the ground. They saw people bloodied and horrible. And then there were quite a few injuries from people running. People ran. And they were running over the top of each other. And I mean, not big ones, but, just bloody elbows and knees and stuff like that. Now, I wasn't out there, so I don't know, but that's what was told to me. They said, yeah, it kind of looked like a bloody mess out there, but none of them were hit by the car, So, and she got out of the car, the car came to a stop, and the woman that was driving it got out and said, I was trying to find a parking place. And then just started walking. Of course, somebody grabbed her, but so she was obviously having some difficulties. Yeah.
Some issue.
Yeah. And I think that's probably in her head what she was doing, was looking for a parking place. Because you know what town's like when the parade's going on, looking for a parking place.
I mean, that's a different type of grief. I mean, loss of life, injury, and the innocence of a hometown.
Mm-hmm.
Homecoming
And
parade.
for me, the biggest difference was the Nash, the baby. The baby. So, but the next year, I think it was the next year, his mom came to a basketball game, and I didn't see her at all. And I'm not sure if I had seen her, that I would have immediately recognized her. But after the game, I saw this woman just walking straight at me, and I thought, what have I done now? And it was Nash's mom. And she said, do you remember me? And I said, I sure do, but I can't place from where. And she said, I'm Nash's mom. And she just wanted to come over and thank me, So, and she was married, and I think she had another baby. I don't know, it was 1 or 2 years after the crash or something, but she was doing okay, We humans are pretty resilient.
I Sometimes it takes a little longer than others, but yeah.
Well, and I have known some people over my career and over my lifetime that an incident where they've lost a husband or a wife or a whatever has like changed them forever and not for the better, and they never ever got any better. They were always, oh, poor me, my husband died and I'm different from everybody else, and that became who they were. That became their identity. So that always makes me sad. But not very many people. But we people in general want to feel better. None of us like to be depressed or down or hurting.
I mean, for someone that's going through like the COVID now, people are all this too, and some of this same experience that you've had could be applied to this too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
lessons learned or advice you want to share?
Well, probably two things that everybody's heard. Well, at least one of the two things everybody's heard all along is don't be stupid. Wear your mask, be careful. You can get this stuff and it can kill you. And just the other one is in this form that it's in right now, this too shall pass. We may live with it for the rest of our lives with an enhanced vaccine or something, just like the flu, but we're going to get past this stage of, I understand. I don't go to work anymore. I'm at home, and unless I'm out at the kennel playing with puppies, I'm at home, which is a saving grace for me. I love going out there and playing with puppies. I've gotten depressed 2 or 3 times during this whole COVID thing. It's stopped trips to Branson. It's stopped seeing my grandson as much, and my life has probably not been as impacted as a lot of others who are still out in the working force and all that. But it's impacted me, and I haven't liked it. And it's like, I've said all along, if I get it, I'm going to get it from church. I guarantee you, because that's where I go. This is probably the most dangerous. But I'm not going to quit going. I'm just not. I try to be careful. I wear my mask, and if I see somebody way, way over there that I know is going to come and hug me in their coffin, I'll go the other way. But I think our world is different. And I don't think and I've used this phrase with you earlier today, I don't think we're going to ever get back to normal. I think there's going to be a new normal. And that seems to be what we do as a population, as a species. We like feeling okay, and we like being comfortable, and we like as little tension and stress as we can get. So we just create a new normal. I can't have my old one, I'll create a new one that's almost as good. And then it ends up being as good. But we take care of ourselves a lot. I think we have a natural bent to be okay, most of us.
I can go 20 years ago, besides the plane crash, was the World Trade Center, the 9/11 thing.
And then Murrah. There's just all sorts of world changers.
They've experienced it, adapted.
But until those times, maybe I was just very protected. I don't know. Or maybe I just grew up in a real good time, during a real good time. But, I was born in 1950, and this bad stuff didn't start happening for 25 or 30 years that I knew about. There's bad stuff. I knew there was bad stuff, but not like a plane flying into a skyscraper and things like that. It seems like I was raised in a pretty idyllic time. But we've had a chance to learn how to face adversity since then, as individuals and as groups and as a nation.
And as a university, How do you think OSU's done on keeping the promise that President Halligan vowed that the night of the memorial?
Excellent.
Memorial
Excellent.
service?
We keep in touch with them. They get a group letter every now and again. I keep in touch with certain ones individually, the ones that I got the closest to. I talk to Karen every day. But, we had family dinner before the Remember the 10 run last weekend or whenever it was. And attendance was about half of what it usually is, and I figured that was a COVID thing. But one of the first people I looked up and saw walking in the door was President Schrum and her husband. And I thought, somebody filled her in. And of course, I'm sure she was aware of everything, but, and she's got a great office full of people that keeps her informed. But, and she knew who I was. She walked over and she said, "You're Dr. Burks, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Susie." I said, "I'm retired, so I'm not Dr. Anybody anymore." And she just kind of laughed. And we had a nice visit. And I said, "Thank you so much for being here." I said, it will be very, very much appreciated. And she was like, "I wouldn't be anyplace else. This is important." And I said, "More than you know, but you'll see in time. You'll see." And she said, "Well, we get together for the other ones too, don't we?" And I said, "Yeah, it's never as big as this, but and it wasn't very big this year. There were a lot of people that just didn't come. But I was very pleased to see her there, and she got up and said a few words, and she was pretty cool.
And then Coach Boynton has stepped right up too.
Oh, he's amazing. He is amazing, and he will never let it die. He's very, very respectful of that time and the impact on his program those events had, and things like that. He's a great guy. I said this to him the other day because he was up there with the families before the game, and or before the run, and he always comes to the run, and he always makes all his players run. They all run. I shouldn't say he makes them. I think he suggests that they run. But he's just, nobody has to beg him to come up there or tell him that this is something you ought to do. And I told him the other night, I said, Coach Sutton's proud of you. And he kind of did a double take. He kind of was over here and he got back over. He said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "You've turned out pretty good as a Cowboy." And I said, "I know Coach Sutton is smiling down at you that you're running his program now." And he was really touched by that. And I meant it. I think Coach would have been, I think he is very pleased that somebody of Mike Boynton's caliber is running that program. I think it's in good hands.
I wondered if some of it could be that, it could be any basketball team. It could happen to any.
Could happen to.
Something could happen to.
Yeah, anybody.
So, there, but for the grace of God, no aisle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think there's a basketball, when it happened, I don't think there's a basketball coach in the world that didn't say, "Oh my gosh, that could have been us." I know.
Have other universities contacted you after that to get some guidance
yeah.
or whatever, just in case?
Yeah. Well, and it's been more when they've had smaller but pretty horrific incidences on campus. I'm not going to name any names, but I remember I got a call one time And it's usually from former colleagues or people that I have known as directors of counseling centers. From we had a once a year big conference. And of course, right after the crash, they all just flocked. Oh, they wanted me to do a presentation. They wanted me to do this, and they wanted me to tell. And the thing is, you can't plan for this. You can't plan for it. Responding to the first one was nothing like responding to the second one, which was nothing like responding to the parade crash. They all have a life and a personality of their own. But I've had some call and say, "What do I need to do to be prepared?" Well, you can't be. You just stay sharp and get a good night's sleep in case you're going to be out for 3 days, because you just don't know.
Yeah, be a good listener. Or
A lot of the counseling centers are in towns, or a lot of the universities are in towns that are big enough that there are mental health agencies in the town. And Stillwater, in my lifetime here, has gotten big enough that we have Grand Lake Mental Health and 2 or 3 others. I'm not even sure of all of them. But I don't think, and I'm making a very generalized statement here, but I don't think that the people that work in university counseling centers now are like my generation at all. They want to work from 8 to 5 and that's it. They don't want to be on call. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. And that may just because I'm old and crotchety. I don't know. But I talked to some of my other retired friends and they're like, do you know my counseling center isn't even doing after hours emergency anymore? They just send them to the mental health place in town. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's what's starting to happen. And I'm pretty sure I think it's where OSU is headed. I don't know. I haven't been in that office since I walked out the door. But I would guess that probably is. OU has gone that way. UCO down in Edmond is really leaning that way, and they do a lot of referring out, I think. And a lot of times, either way, whoever does whatever first between us and OU, the other one usually follows, And I don't know any of that for sure and for real. It's just things I've heard. So I don't think counseling centers, university counseling services, are going to be big emergency responders in the future. And if, God forbid, there's a big something that happens, like a plane crash or a parade crash or whatever it may be, they're not going to be at all prepared. If they quit doing emergencies, because there's a learning curve and there's an art, and you have to learn which of your staff can handle it and which can't. But
well, do you think maybe it comes down to insurance, malpractice insurance, or
the university. If you're a university counseling, though, you're covered by the university.
Well, that's true.
It's not a penny's going to come out of your pocket.
Just a change of times.
I guess for all of my life, and probably through all time of perpetuity, the older generation is like, well, these kids don't even know how to work. They should have had to have it. And I walked to school uphill both ways, that kind of deal,
Yeah.
And I think that just continues to pass itself on. Because I certainly see things, not necessarily here. I make it a point not to go in the counseling center here. I don't want to. I just don't want to. When I walked out that door, I was done. I see those people at different places, and some of them are some of my dearest friends, and I still see them, but I don't need to be in that office. And I'm hardly ever in the union. The only board I retained when I retired was Pete's Pet Posse.
I was going to ask you about Pete's Pet.
Yeah. Yeah, I helped start that. Not a big part of it. Kendria Cost is the one that did it all. But yeah, I'm still on the board. And I'll stay on that board as long as they'll have me.
And it's very popular.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I did a presentation on that at my last directors conference, and everybody was just like, "Oh, it's a great idea." So, of course,
Did it help with that after the parade crash? I mean, do you remember
I don't
if there
remember.
was any,
I don't remember. I didn't ever see any dogs in the ER.
not the plane crash, I mean the parade.
Parade crash. Yeah, I don't never see any dogs in the emergency room, but they wouldn't come out there. They wouldn't, unless they knew they were welcome, unless they were called for, they wouldn't come out, and probably would never be called for into the emergency room.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, little sanitation issues.
I was thinking more of the students on campus.
Yeah, I'm sure the posse went out in force that next Monday. I'm sure they did. And I'm sure I know that one way or another, but it's just been a while, and, you know.
I mean, because the student body plans, I mean, part of the student body plans all the homecoming.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
festivities,
Yeah.
so.
Well, and the pups do go into the Greek system too. They go into the houses, and they'll get calls. I know they go into the houses because I went a couple of times with one of the pairs, the owner handler and the dog, and I can't remember what sorority it was, but it was right after spring break, and they had a member killed in a car wreck during spring break, and we took the dogs in there, and you know, it just helps. They just help.
I know the library has missed having them here during COVID, you know, and they're starting to show back up.
Yeah, they're starting to come out a little bit. And of course, that's more about the handlers than anybody else. That's
Do you have one?
one of the posse dogs. No,
Did you have one?
no.
No.
I have a 12-year-old spoiled, rotten schnauzer, miniature schnauzer that would never have made
Yeah.
all this manners and stuff that they have to have. She knows nothing of manners. She just believes every human was put here for her. You know.
I have
But-
a 15-year-old dachshund that's that way.
Do
She
you
would
really?
never have
No,
passed.
no, Rocky would never have made it through. She would have been a beauty school dropout, you know. But maybe when she's gone, maybe, you know, I might. I don't know. I mean, I'm a 71. I don't know if I'll have the energy by then, because I hope she lives a good while longer. But I have thought about it, you know, and I've thought about, my best friend raises German Shepherds, and I've thought, are you going to get a Shepherd when Rocky's gone? I've tried to get them with Rocky, the Schnauzer, and she's mean to him. She waits until they go to sleep, and then she harasses them. She'll go up and bite their lip and then run. And they're like, huh? What? Oh. And then she'll do it again. And they finally figure it out. And when they growl at her the first time, it's like, sorry, you got to go back to the kennel because you're going to kill her if you don't. Sooner or later, they don't usually say anything, but then they get to a point where they get sick of it. And they warn her. And I mean, they could snap her neck in one bite, you know. So I have to protect her dumb self. So she's funny. She's mean to German Shepherds. I think she really likes being an only child. So.
And she's probably enjoying you being home for retirement.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And when I go out to the kennel and visit, come back, she ignores me the rest of the night because she can smell puppies and a jillion different dogs all over me, you know, and she's like, you went where? You know? Really?
So besides that, what do you do for your you know, fun or for your days these days?
Well, the kennel is huge. Before COVID, we were really big time Branson goers. You know, my daughter would call me or I'd call her on a Friday morning and say, hey, can you leave at noon? Let's go to Branson. And we'd go. But she lived there for 10 years. She worked there and lived there. She managed a couple of theaters. And so before COVID, we did Branson a lot. Or I would go. I mean, I have enough friends up there. I'll go by myself. You know, I don't care. And so I did that before. But right now, it's pretty much the kennel. I mean, most of the time we're outside. and I'm around more dogs than humans, you know. And I do actually do something, you know, I've tried to look around, and I'm no master dog trainer or anything like that. I can't help it. I mean, our dog trainer just laughs at me and my schnauzer. He's like, I said, she's trained. She knows how to sit. He said, can you make her sit without a treat? I said, oh, they're supposed to sit without a treat. Really? Interesting concept. But they make fun of me. But they all hate to do dishes. We have an elevated tub out there where we can put the dog, and we have little steps. And the dogs can go in there to get a bath, and you're standing up instead of bending over. And then that's where they dump all the dirty water buckets and food pans and all that kind of stuff. And they have kids, teenagers, college girls that work out there. They hate to do the dishes. Everybody hates to do the dishes. And I was like, let me get some rubber gloves. And because I don't mind doing the dishes, you know. And so I try to do things that nobody wants to do when I go out there, just to make their life a little bit better and everything. Now, if I miss 2 or 3 days, I start getting calls. The tub's full of dirty dishes. Well, wash them, you know. But that's been a great place for me. That's a real healing place for me. And she's got horses out there, so I can go bury my face in a horse's neck and smell that smell, and you know.
Takes you back to warm and friendly times.
And ride occasionally out there. So,
Still your happy place.
I'm more concerned about falling off now because of broken hips and stuff like that, you know. But yeah, I love it. I love being up there. I'm just not as brave I'm not as cavalier as I used to be, probably. You
Tell
know.
me how that happens.
Isn't it though? Isn't it though? Yeah, I thought I was invincible when I was on a horse 100 years ago, but now it's like, wow, you could really get hurt. But yeah, I think that the being able to have that place out there that's just out in the country, and even if it's just standing and looking into the pasture and seeing the horses run around, that brings me joy. Just seeing them, you know, they're just beautiful. And then getting to play with puppies. I mean, my arms are always all torn up. I always look like somebody's chewed on. Well, somebody has chewed on me. And you know, little puppy teeth and
had that puppy smell too, though.
And puppy breath. I love puppy breath. Except with these, if you really try too hard to smell the puppy breath, they'll bite your nose. Just because they're puppies. You know, they're just like, but that's a good place to be. It's a really good, safe place for me to be. And of course, spending time with my grandson. That's the best. That's the best.
Well, it's close enough by where you can do that.
Yeah, it is. And they come up quite a bit on weekends because they really like to go out to the kennel and play with puppies too. Yeah. So, and then my church. I'm active in my church. And a lot of my closest friends are in the church, and we hang out together and just do all sorts of stuff. So that's a big deal to me.
So retirement was a good idea.
Absolutely. I don't think I would have been ready any time before. But when I knew, I knew. I was like, I'm done. I don't have any more. You know, and it was in the emergency room after that parade crash. I'd been there 3 or 4 hours probably, just dealing with they just had people everywhere. And a lot of them just had like a scratch, or, you know, they needed stitches when they were waiting for that or something. But still, I just knew I just didn't have any more.
Yeah, a couple of weeks away wouldn't recharge your battery.
No. My pastor has tried to talk me a couple of times into setting up an office out at the church and seeing people from the church. And I told him, I said, first of all, I don't know if I'd even enjoy doing therapy again.
I'll make you a pie instead.
No, I probably won't do that either. No, I'm not a big baker. But, and I do some consultation. There's a couple of therapists in Oklahoma City that if they get into a real, and I don't charge anybody for it, but it helps me to still maintain an office at home. And, it's good for me tax-wise to do that. They'll call if they have a real tough case. And it's usually the two I'm thinking of, they both did internships and practicums under me, and they're both in private practice in Oklahoma City. And I have a couple in Tulsa and several here that are in private practice that every now and then, or maybe somebody I went to school with and it's just a colleague and they just want to run something past, So I don't have the other directors calling from around the United States has stopped.
Okay.
After 5 years, it stopped.
How long did it take? A couple of years
Yeah,
at least?
At least a couple of years, yeah. And I did go to the directors conference the fall, right after I retired in the summer, just to tell everybody bye. So they all knew I was retiring.
Well, have any of the ones that got the scholarships, the part of what the council service does now is the scholarships in the names of the 10 men?
Yeah.
Have any of the recipients of those, have they come back or?
And worked at our place? Not when I was there, but I think they have since.
Okay.
I think they have since. In fact, I think it's been good for the counseling center because I don't know how politics or anything else works, but they have there's a counseling psych department in education, and then a clinical psych department in arts and science, I believe. And we got a lot more students from the College of Education wanting to work at the counseling center than from the clinical doctoral program. But I've seen on their website that they've had several from the clinical program now. So I think it's kind of brought it to light, and especially with the scholarship and stuff. So that's been a big deal.
Are you on the committee that chooses who gets it?
Yeah, I'm still on the whatever it's called, whatever committee that's for the Remember the 10 proceeds. And mainly that's just families. There's usually a meeting with a couple of 3 different families, and we say, well, this is what we've culled it down to. Are you okay? And they're like, yeah. And then we've had other families that have said, I trust you guys. Don't bother me with it. I think it's great that we're doing it, So, but they were all in agreement with the proceeds of the run going to the counseling center for scholarships, yeah. And, some of them don't ever step foot in the counseling center, but they get a scholarship to work on their academic degree. So, and that's good too. That's good, yeah. Anything we can do to help.
Yeah, and that's why we're here, isn't it?
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
Help them with their next phase of life,
Well,
whatever that might be.
I'll tell you what, the longer I'm away from it, the more I hear about hoops that they're making the kids jump through, and I think I would never have finished. I would never have jumped through all those hoops, but you don't know. I jumped through plenty. No.
Well, OSU's lucky, or considered should be, well, they are lucky that Sherry told you to go take that first class.
Isn't that something?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, started that.
When are you going to go back to school and be able to get paid for what you do anyway? And I thought, And she was my supervisor the first 2 years. And she was just a phenomenal therapist. Of course, she lived with a psychiatrist forever, and they bounced things off each other all the time. And she was just a tremendous mentor, as was Pat Murphy. Pat Murphy was the best. He's just a phenomenal man. The director before me.
Well, it makes you think, have you paid that forward have you suggested that to someone else and they went off and did great things too?
Well, probably so. Now, the whole setup of the counseling center is very different now. There isn't a director of there is a director of counseling, but it's the same person who I adore and think is very competent, who's the director over University Health Services. And somewhere along the way in the last 5 years, they put him over the counseling area too. And there's a coordinator of counseling, but he's the director, and he's tremendous in college health. But the most he knows about counseling is what he's heard from me over the years, and I kind of took him under my wing when he came here, and he's a good guy. And I go by and see him every now and then, but I don't think he even sticks his head in the counseling center very often. So they're just kind of doing their own thing. And I don't know what that is. It may be 10 times better than what we ever did, or it may be the same, or it may be worse. I don't know. But he's a good guy. But it doesn't have somebody that's in the field directly,
Someone that could spend 2 years out of the office doing
Yeah. Well, yeah. And like I said, this generation of counselors is very different.
Well, and that circumstance was different.
Absolutely.
It was more unusual than.
And I had good help back at the office, or I couldn't have done that,
And support from above.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. Well, she didn't know her way around Stillwater very well, so that's probably, no. She hadn't been here 6 months.
Well, we're talking about maybe President Halligan, you went higher above.
Oh, well,
Still
yeah.
above.
And there was a time there that I probably could ask Halligan for anything. I probably could ask him for a pony, and he'd have gotten me a pony.
There is little Susie.
Yeah. And yeah. And I just adore them. I adore them both. They're just some of the most precious people.
Do you mind telling the story about him from the dedication where she poked him and told him to?
Did I tell you about that, or did somebody else?
You did on the phone.
No.
Or, I mean, you may not.
Oh, I'm fine with it. And they would laugh. They would laugh. They would think it was fine. It was when we dedicated the memorial in Colorado up in Strasburg. And Dr. Halligan, Dr. and Mrs. Halligan were two of the few people that were seated. All of us support people were kind of outside and kind of staying back as far as we could. The families, it was very warm that day. And the families, we had erected some, not tents, but tent tops. And they were under that in the shade. Halligans were sitting over here right outside the memorial. And there were a couple of Strasburg officials and a couple of the first responders to the crash. And they were in the bright sunlight and everything. But anyway, the memorial went on. And honestly, I don't remember a lot of details about the dedication. I probably need to pull out my CD at some time and watch it again. I'd probably gain a lot from it that I don't remember. I was more concerned about watching families and all that stuff. And I did happen to look up, and I remember seeing Ann turn to Jim and go, and I thought, and it wasn't harsh or anything, but I thought, well, she just told him she wanted him to something she wanted him to hear. And then I didn't pay a lot of attention to it after that. Later on, I was told that Jim got very emotional during, I don't remember who was talking. I don't know what was going on. I would almost bet it was somebody from Strasburg, the fire chief or somebody like that. And they've just become our family. There's 2 couples of them that came down. Oh, it's been 10 years ago now. But they were on vacation, and they decided to come through Stillwater because they wanted to see campus. And they brought a big baggie full of soil from up by the plane crash site. And we put it out in the gardens, in the formal gardens. So, we mix all that stuff. But anyway, I saw Ann kind of at him and found out later that he was getting emotional. And Ann says this is a phrase from Iowa, where they're from. But she said she turned around and looked at him and he was starting to cry. And she just elbowed him and said, "Buck up, Halligan." And he dried up his tears and sat up and bucked up. She's a strong woman, you know, and I think he would tell you that she's very, very integral part of any success he ever had. But you've met him.
Yep.
Were you here when they were president?
Yes.
One of the greatest blessings of my life is knowing them. You know. And I love, my dearest and closest friends call me Suze. And so does he. And he never heard it anywhere. He just started calling me Suze. Yeah. I just love that. I love it. He's a very, and she too. Man, I remember the first night, the night of the plane crash. We all met out at Frontier Engineering. And we pretty much planned the memorial that night. I mean, and it was probably a table, a huge long table of 20, 25 people. I don't even remember. There were a lot of people there. And when I say we, you know, I was at the table. And we planned that. They planned who was going to go back to Colorado to accompany the bodies back. They planned several things. And I think it was like 4 a.m. And I for some reason, I caught this. And I looked up, and Ann reached over and patted his arm. And she said, "Halligan, enough's enough. Shut this down." And I mean, he shut it down, and off we went. And, you know, she just knew. She knew everybody had. Yeah. And she called him Halligan a lot. It's probably a pretty intimate thing between them, I would think. Because, you know, if she's speaking publicly, she'll say Dr. Halligan or Jim. But I heard her call him Halligan a lot. It's very affectionate. Yeah. So, phenomenal people. He was the heart and soul of the response. He really was. Love them dearly.
Speaking at the memorial service must have been really, really hard for him for all of them. Not just him, I guess.
Yeah, both you mean the one here in Gallagher? Oh.
Yeah, Gallagher, yeah. I was still so new at that point, too.
Yeah, and I remember that, but I was sitting right square in the middle of the basketball team. And I was trying to get, you know, they're a lot taller than me. And I was trying to get to the place where I could and check on both sides, just make sure they were both, you know. I mean, I wasn't there just because they wanted to sit by me, without looking too conspicuous and stuff. So I didn't hear a lot of it, but I've watched it since. And I've watched the one out in Colorado since.
How Andre Williams got through reading that poem was amazing. You know?
Andre's a good kid. He's still around. He still comes around. You know.
And I noticed that they played a different song for each. When someone stood up to read the, you know, about the person, they would play a different song. So I don't know. Did you have any?
I didn't.
Was that Natalie?
That was families picking that.
Family got to choose.
Family chose those. Yeah. We made it as personalized. I say we. That was the wish, that it was as personalized for each one as it could be. We didn't want anybody. We didn't want the co-pilot from Sweden to get lost in it all, you know.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I was there. It was very well. Very
Were
well
you?
done and very, very moving.
Yeah. That was all.
I kind of felt. I mean, you've got public grief and private grief, and
There's
balancing that out is kind of
it's hard.
hard.
I think most of the families appreciated that, though. I think they appreciated the outpouring of love. Because, I mean, it was the biggest thing that had ever happened in their lives. And this just kind of signified that it was a big thing to OSU too. You know, and we knew and we cared. You know, if it was, people didn't show up like that at the individual funerals, you know. I went to a lot of Um, and they were just, well, they had a couple of weird. Do you remember the guy that was yelling up in the second level of Gallagher Iba during the, depended on where you were sitting, whether you could hear him or not. He stood up and started yelling, and I heard him. I was down on the floor, and I looked back, and I saw him standing up, and he was flailing his arms around, and I couldn't understand him because I was on the floor. And then I saw our cops just go, whoom, and they walked him out. Well, he was a very, very mentally unstable person. And I don't remember. We had two incidents like that, one at the big memorial and one at Bill Teagan's funeral. I think this guy in Gallagher Iba was saying, quit talking about dead people. I don't want to hear about dead people. And I mean, he's screaming from the balcony. And we're like, oh my gosh, oh my God. And he said, let's talk about something happy. And about that time, the cops got him and got him out of there. But I mean, he didn't mean any harm. He was just, he wandered in there probably, saw a bunch of people walking in, and then he went. He probably thought he was going to a basketball game. And if we quit talking about dead people, the basketball game would start. But then at Bill Teagan's funeral, he was the broadcaster from Channel 9. A guy got up, and I happened to be with two cops at that one. Guy got up from the very back of the church. We were on the very back row. And the church was kind of like a movie theater. It kind of slanted down. And this guy got up, and he walked down to the front and started pacing in front of Bill's casket. And he was yelling, rise from the dead, Bill Tiggins, rise from the dead. And it was another very mentally disturbed person. He didn't mean any harm by it. And boy, those two cops got down there that long and just, hey, buddy, come on, let's go out here and talk about Bill Tiggins. And I took him outside and called whoever you call in Edmond or Oklahoma City or wherever we were. And somebody came and got him, you know. Yeah, so we had a couple of pretty strange incidents go on. Didn't happen at Will's funeral. But Will's funeral was here. And, well, Hancock. And his dad, he worked for the NCAA for a long time. Very highly involved, and he always works the Olympics. He and Nikki just got back from Tokyo. He's the director of the FPF, is it football playoff series?
I think so.
Yeah, that's what he's director of. So he's very involved, and he understands sports and everything. So I've gotten to know them real well, and just adore him. Just absolutely adore him. And we can sit around, and somebody will bring up the guy asking Bill Tiggins to rise from the dead, and I don't think anybody would be so tasteless just bring it up in front of Janice or Amanda, but just quietly among, it's like, oh yeah, God, that was crazy, and things happen. That's how things happen when people die.
Yeah, it impacts people differently.
And even people that are grief is just hard. Even people that aren't crazy, that are perfectly normal people.
You have to work with families a little bit for comments made like that. I mean, did you have to?
Yeah. Well, and we stuck pretty close to certain ones because there were some that were, most of them were just so deeply in grief, they didn't even know where they were. And I don't know, did you ask Karen any questions about the memorial service?
She couldn't.
Doesn't remember any of it, does she? Yeah.
And I wouldn't expect her.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect her to.
I think there's a whole lot she doesn't remember. That first month, probably. I was real surprised when we first started walking that she talked about as much stuff as she did. Karen's pretty honest. She doesn't have anything to hide. She's just transparent as she could. One of the finest people I've ever known in my life. I mean, what a blessing I got. And her parents are wonderful and lovely. And Will's parents are wonderful and lovely. And Gran, Will's grandma that I told you about, I met her for the first time. I love this story. I met her for the first time in Colorado, and I was myself and another counselor that I had brought with me just for the sheer magnitude of what was going on for the memorial dedication the next day. And we were down in the lobby of the hotel because families were coming in, and I wanted to be down there and greet them and say hello and stuff. Well, I saw the Hancocks walk in, and I saw this little short, silver-headed, spry lady, and it was Gran. It was Nikki's mother and Will's grandmother. And the woman went to law school at 50 and then had a whole private practice for years and years. And she was still just sharp as a tack. But I went over, and I had met Bill and Nikki a couple of times. So I just went, I didn't know anybody very well. But I went over and shook their hands and said, "How was your trip?" Whatever I said, And then I turned and I said, "And you're Gran?" And she said, "Are you Susie?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she reached up. I can hardly tell this without crying. She reached up and she grabbed my face and she said, "And I'm your Gran too now." And has always treated me that way till the day she died. Just amazing. And I didn't ever know any of my grandparents. So I finally had a Gran, just immediately. And I asked her later, I said, "Did you just size me up that quick?" And she said, "No, I'd heard a lot about you." I said, "Oh, and you still wanted to be my Gran?" She said, "Yes, sweetie." She was ornery. She was very, very progressive and very before her time in Hobart, Oklahoma. She was very before her time. And her husband, Johnny, died not 3 or 4 months before Will did. Yeah, she had just lost Johnny. The grandkids called him Kawile, but nobody knows why. Nobody ever knew why. It sounds like an Indian name to me, a native name. But,
I'm not even sure I could spell that.
no. But Gran, she was special. She's so special. Leon, Gran and Leon had a love affair going on. He moved her a couple of times when she moved from one assisted living to another, and he'd have done anything for her. Everybody adored Gran. And she could piss you off too, because, she never did me, but I'd see her jump back at people every now and then. I'd be like, whoa, she's feisty.
That made her a good lawyer, I guess.
I think so.
Her on your side.
I think so. But she and, Leon, and I think he gathered up a couple of other of his cops, of his officers, and they came out and had her moved in no time at all. And she just thought that was the coolest thing. She patted his face. So, so many good things that came out of that. So many good relationships, so many good things.
I think Dr. Bird referred to it as collateral beauty.
Okay.
Some of the good
I'd never heard that phrase before.
collateral.
There was certainly some beauty in it. Lots of beauty. Surrounded by a whole lot of pain and grief. But I think, and I used to tell this, if I presented on this stuff, I used to say, don't question anything you want to do. If it's in the parameters of respectful, kind, and it feels like the right thing to do, go ahead and do it. Even if you make a mistake, they're going to forgive you. they're going to remember you just reaching out. They're going to remember you trying to help more than anything else. And I'm sure we fumbled around a lot, you know. We were probably better at it by the time of the second crash. But yeah. I think as long as you sincerely care, I don't think you can really mess up. Not if you really care.
People can usually sense if
it's sincere and genuine.
sincere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people come by and say, "Oh, so sorry for your loss," but you can tell the sincere people. At least I think I can. When I buried my dad and stuff, you know, it almost seemed like I could tell the people that were there because they thought they ought to be, and the ones that were there because they loved him. You know, so it was a life-changing event. That was for sure. All of them were. All three. Mm-hmm.
Changed families and changed coworkers and changed the university. And
Yeah.
Cowboy family, cowboy community, whichever we want to refer to it as.
It changed such simple little things for me as walking into Gallagher-Iba. I have a whole different feeling walking in there now than I ever did before. And, you know, I went to undergraduate school here and graduate, and I was always there for basketball and wrestling and football in the stadium. But football stadium doesn't feel different to me, but Gallagher-Iba does. It's a little more sacred now. I don't know. It's a little more sacred. And one of my biggest deals, and I have nothing to do with any of it anymore, but I push it every chance I get, is we need to tell the kids that are coming into school today about the 10, about the 4, about the parade crash. Karen has recruits all the time, high school kids that are coming up that we're trying to recruit to play soccer at OSU. When she tours Gallagher-Iba, and she goes from the north end to the south end, and the last thing before they get to the academic resource center is the memorial. And she said 9 times out of 10 they'll go, "What's that?" They weren't born when that crash happened. They weren't born. And I said, "Karen, what do you do?" Did she talk to you about that?
What do you do?
She says she tells them the story of the plane crash. And she doesn't say anything about Will or herself. She says soon enough, they will take some time and walk over there and look, or they will hear, you know, just through the grapevine. And then they come to her and go, "I didn't know that your husband was on that wall, Karen." That's part of our history, and it's part of our heritage. And I think our young people should know about it. I don't know. Maybe they're teaching it in freshman orientation. I don't know. I don't have a clue. But I would go in a heartbeat and talk to freshman orientation classes about it. I'd have to shorten it pretty good, wouldn't I? But it really did take it was 2 years before there was some semblance of normalcy. I think after we got home from dedicating the memorial in Strasbourg, I think things started to kind of get...
I didn't realize the timeline of when that was. I thought that dedication and memorial was in Colorado was
right away.
Like in August of that year. Which came first?
It may have been.
I don't know which. Did they do the one in the Gallagher first or the one?
Gallagher.
So it would have been a year
Oh, you mean the memorial in Gallagher or the memorial service?
Monument.
Yeah.
The wall and the kneeling cowboy.
I don't know.
I don't know if I can go back and look at things.
You know,
Not that it matters.
I spent so much time just getting up and addressing what was right there.
Yes.
I don't know when we dedicated I know it was hot when we dedicated that memorial out there.
It was in August, but I don't know.
Was it?
I don't know what year.
It was hot.
What year?
Well, the crash was in 01.
I mean, I could go back and look through some of the colleagues and stuff and figure that out.
Probably 03.
So a couple of years.
I'm
later.
guessing.
I mean, it would take time to get it made and designed and
Well, and
all that.
there was a dairy farmer right across the road that owned the property, and he of course gave it to us. But they were the first ones out there. They heard the screaming and thought, I mean, they didn't hear screaming inside the house until the dad and the son got out there, and they were the ones screaming. Everybody else was gone, of course. And that's when she called 911, and that's about all I know. But I used to know their names, and I've met them, and they're just lovely people.
When was the last time you were out there? How long ago?
It's been a while. Yeah. Probably 6 years. My daughter and I took a trip and purposely and went up there. I wanted her to meet everybody up there. I wanted her to meet Jeff and Susan Thane and, all the folks up there that helped take care of us and help us do what we did. So, and I wanted her to be there. I wanted her to if you ever go to Denver, if you're ever driving somewhere that way,
Gotta stop. It's on
Yeah, you
it's
do.
on my list.
you do.
I haven't been able to get there, but
It's a very sacred place. It really is. And every time I've ever been, I know you've looked at pictures of it. There's that, and there's the wrought iron fence, and then on out is the crash site on beyond that fence area, which is the memorial itself. There's always OSU shirts hanging on that fence all the way around. And I don't know. They said they wait till it gets filled up. And Roger Engelsman, who was he was a lieutenant on the police force or the sheriff's department, his wife, we pay her to take care of the memorial and clean it up and pick all the shirts up. And they're not thrown away. I'm not sure what they do with them, but they don't throw them away. They're saved. But they were great people. Are great people. I can't think of it. Lori is his wife's name. Takes a while.
takes a while, but it comes.
Yeah, finally. But great group of people.
Bad circumstances, but
Well, and
goodness comes out. Not if they work for OSU though.
well, that's true. We're all wonderful.
They wouldn't be.
Yeah, and the same thing, Budke. Oh, he was very loved by his girls. Extremely loved. Is that part of all this too?
It will be.
The four?
Yeah.
If you ever want to talk to one of the girls, one of the players, let me know. I don't know if she'd do it, but I think she might.
Okay.
She's got her master's in counseling now.
Maybe you had something to do with that. Maybe.
Maybe just a little bit.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah, she was my one that I adopted through that. I mean, I got close to all of them, but she's mine. She's married and has a baby now. It's my second grandbaby in my head. But yeah, she's very wise, and she'd be a good one to talk to you if you want to talk, if she'll do it. And she's very shy, but then she'd get in here and she'd be like, I don't want to do this. What am I going to say? And then she'd get in here and get to talking and be fine. I think she's just told herself she's shy all her life. I don't think she really is.
Sometimes it's a protective mechanism. I've come to
That's true.
think of it for myself anyway.
Yeah.
But I'm like that too. So
I can't ever sell that to anybody. I've tried to use that, and they're like, nah, I don't think you're shy. No.
I use that, and then the middle daughter. That's another.
Yeah. And I was the baby. And really, like 9 years younger than my brother and 6 or 7 years younger than my sister. So I
almost
really
like
was.
another.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And well, they didn't live with us. My brother from high school on lived with us full time, but my sister never lived with us. She came and visited, but she didn't live with us ever. So, yeah, I was an only child. I made sure of it.
Putnam City original has served you well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's we had our 50th reunion a few years back. And out of over 900 people in our graduating class, there were over 400 people at our reunion. So we got half. We got half of them there. I was surprised even half of us are still alive, you know. But it was so much fun. It was, and I signed up and then just argued with myself. I'm not going. Nobody will even remember who you were. And, you know, all the stuff you do. And I went and just had a ball. It was really weird because some of the people that I thought didn't even know me from Adam, like cheerleader types, they just came up and acted like we were the best of friends. And I'm like, okay, don't remember it being that way, but that's okay. You know? Yeah, but it was, I highly, have you been to any of your class reunions?
No, I keep putting it off.
I recommend it. I didn't want to go. I sat out in my truck in the parking lot of Quail Creek Golf and Country Club for about 20 minutes and didn't go in and watch people walking in. And it took me seeing a few people that didn't look like I expected them to think, I'm not doing so bad. This may be okay.
15 years.
Mm-hmm. And it ended up just being good. I mean, it was just, there wasn't any class system like there was in high school. You know, it wasn't like, well, she's in the popular crowd and you're not. So it was just all of us getting together. All the pretenses were gone, at least from what I saw.
Maturity came to the level.
Yeah. And we had several of our favorite teachers that we had contacted, and they came.
Well,
So,
they had to be old if they were.
well, they were young. They were young when we were in school. But one of them was Coach Stan Abel. He was the head wrestling coach. He wrestled at OSU when I was it was long before I was in college because I had him in high school. He wrestled at OSU, and then he taught at Putnam City, and that's when I knew him. And then I babysat for he and his wife when his kids were babies. And then he ended up leaving Putnam City and was the head coach at OU for years, head wrestling coach at OU. But somebody said, is Coach Abel still alive? And I said, yeah, I stay in touch with him. And they said, oh, we should have called him. I said, well, I'll call him, because I had it in my phone. And I called him. He lives in Norman, and he drove all the way over to North Oklahoma City, almost to Edmond. And he was there the whole night. And it was good. We probably had 5 teachers there.
But reminiscent and feeling appreciated.
Yeah, we didn't call the ones we didn't like. But it was a much more level playing field. So take that, if you will, and
Consider going in a few years.
And the thing is, if you get there and it's horrible,
You can leave.
all you gotta do is go out the door. Nobody would have ever noticed if I had turned around and walked out the door. I was there and I had with my senior picture on it, a button with my senior pictures. And that's how you walked up to people. You went, hi, and looked at that button to see who they were. But it was nothing like high school. The playing field was really leveled. There were no cool kids and not cool kids and none of that. None of that. One of our words for the boys that rode motorcycles and were kind of wild. Hoods. We called them hoods. And there were like 2 hoods there, and they were both, one was an attorney and one was a physician. And it was like, what happened to you? How did you go from your motorcycle and a cigarette hanging out your mouth and your hair all greased back? Well, just like Grease, just like the show Grease. But so it really levels the playing field. So I think you'd enjoy it. And if you don't, you leave. If you don't, you leave. So.
Words of advice or words of wisdom.
Well, I don't know how wise they are, but that was certainly my experience. Where are you from?
Tennessee.
Oh, okay, cool. You don't sound like it.
You don't sound like I'm from the South.
No, not any farther south than Oklahoma.
Well, I've been in Oklahoma since '96, so maybe
It's kind of,
rubbed off on me.
well, now, just then when you said maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
Or when I say might could,
I might could do that. Yeah, well, I need to look at my calendar, but I might could. I had a lot of my dad's people. I came from Arkansas, so I had a lot of real Southern talking cousins and folks. My uncle, my dad's brother-in-law. They all lived. All my relatives on the same dirt road, and all the men worked at the cement factory. And the cement factory shut down when deer season opened. Just shut down because everybody was gone anyway. People weren't coming to work even if it was open. And that's kind of the life there. But I remember going to visit one time and I don't know what my uncle's name was. The initials on the mailbox were E.D. Thomas. I don't know what E.D. stood for. Everybody called him Monk because he looked like a monkey. They all thought because he had real sticky out ears. And he was driving, he was out hunting by himself, squirrel hunting, shotgun in his lap, Jeep with no lid on it, driving through the woods, and a branch whipped down and whipped across his ear and cut the top of his ear off. He stopped, put the Jeep in reverse, backed up real slow till he saw his ear, grabbed it, put it in his pocket, finished hunting, and then he went to the hospital. And they said, well, it's been several hours. We can't sew this ear back on. It's gone. Oh, okay, we'll just throw it away then. And, I always remember my Uncle Monk with a half an ear and finally got to hear the story. So that's the kind of people that I had the privilege of growing up around as a kid too. Some of them.
Hear someone saying his wife chopped his ears off. I don't know.
Really?
I shouldn't say
No,
that.
that's great. She talked his ears off. Aunt Helen talked till his ear fell off. Aunt Helen and Uncle Monk. But, those are my most Southern-ish type folks.
Well, we all come from somewhere, don't we? And that comes with us.
Oh, absolutely.
That comes with us.
Absolutely. My mother was from Oklahoma City. My dad was from Arkansas. And I still have cousins in Arkansas. We still keep in touch.
And do you consider Oklahoma City home or Stillwater home? Or just
Good
Oklahoma?
question.
Or Oklahoma in general, I guess.
Stillwater's home.
Stillwater's home.
Yeah. I love growing up in Oklahoma City. I love my school. I love my friends. I love my church. But Stillwater's home. Yeah.
Got a lot of friends here too. Sounds like.
And it's been enough years, for goodness sakes. I moved up here in 1968.
I think maybe that's a good place to stop.
Yeah, think?
On chicken.
Yeah.
Well, we've covered a lot.
We have.
You want to add?
I digressed a lot too.
No, that's fine. I usually end my interviews with, how do you want people to remember you?
Well, if they remember me, I hope they remember me as somebody that did some good. If I had my choice, I would much rather they remember the 10 and the 4 and the parade crush people than me. Much rather. So, but I think I did a little good. I don't know. Yeah.
I think you did a lot of good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Somebody's been lying to you.
And then we'll just say thank you for all your goodness and courage you've done for OSU and OSU family. You've been great.
Yeah. They're the ones. I mean, with leadership like Halligan and Ann, not just Halligan, but her, with that kind of leadership. And Lee Bird was phenomenal. She was. She hadn't been here 6 months, and she was really good. She was my boss for 15 years or whatever before I retired. We certainly had our differences from time to time, but during that time, in that situation, she was we really worked well together in that situation. We really did. There are a lot of wonderful people that just all of a sudden were there. Yeah. And Natalie Watkins was the one that bought the teddy bears. And did you ever see the little coins, the pennies with angels, the angel cut out? Yeah. That was Natalie. Natalie did a bunch of stuff like that. Have you spoken with her?
Nope, she's on my list.
Has she responded?
No, but like I said, the timing of the invite was not very good with COVID right around the corner. So
Yeah.
I need to do a repeat.